All right, hello everyone. My name is Brian Laufer. I am the Vice President here at QuoteWorks. And today what we're going to be doing is going over a vendor RFQ. And vendor RFQ is basically going to be a way for you to manage all of your vendor communications. And while we go through this, if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please feel free to ask down below. And we'll go ahead and try to answer those throughout. Some questions to ask yourself while you're going through this is how you're managing your vendor communications now, and how you're organizing them, and how can they be improved. So let's go ahead and get started here with some short slides, and then what we'll do is go through and actually see vendor RFQ from start to finish. So these are just some questions to ask yourself, and they'll work all the way through this webinar here. So right now, are you struggling with manually requesting pricing from multiple vendors? Do you find it difficult to keep track of which vendors have responded to your pricing requests? Do you manually negotiate pricing with your vendors? And lastly here, do you need a centralized place to organize and compare all the prices that you've received from your vendors? If you've answered yes to any of those, that's where vendor RFQ is going to come into play. So let's go ahead and actually see vendor RFQ here. One of the things that I didn't say is that vendor RFQ is an add-on subscription to QuoteWorks, and it works with both QuoteWorks Desktop as well as QuoteWorks Web. So let's go ahead and start off by just adding a couple of items to our quote here, and we can go ahead and request an RFQ from our vendors. And we'll talk about that process. And like I said, as I'm going through this, if you have questions, ask down below. All right, so let's go ahead and bring up our product lookup. And basically, we're going to be starting by adding products from Eatalyze here, but you can really use any of the product databases that you currently have, or you can manually type them in as well. So we'll go ahead and just go ahead and select a keyboard here. And you'll notice that I am able to get pricing availability from our vendors here, but we have integrations with I think it's like 13 or so different vendors or whatnot. But even if there is a vendor that we don't have an integration with, that's where vendor RFQ will really shine, because you're going to be able to have that communication with your vendors there. All right, so we'll go ahead and source it from Synnex here to start off with. And maybe we'll go ahead and add a mouse as well. These are going to be very simple RFQs that we're going to start off with here. And we'll go ahead and go with D&H there. All right, so we have two items here on our quote. And let's go ahead and send these off. And I'm just going to select them just by holding down Control. And we're going to click on the plus button right here. And we do have to save it first, so we'll go ahead and do that. And what we're going to do is create a brand new RFQ. And we'll go ahead and click on OK. And then from here, we can select which vendors we want to send this off to. I'm going to, just for right now, we'll do Synnex and Tech Data, and then we'll talk about how to add additional vendors to this list in just a moment here. And we'll go ahead and click on OK. And then we're going to enter in the RFQ name, and it's going to default, as you can see, to the name of the document. We'll just do keyboard and mouse, click on OK. And then we're going to have a chance to enter in internal notes. So this is going to be stuff that your vendors will not see. We'll just say for webinar here and click on OK. Now, what's going to be important here is to have a communication with your vendors. So these are going to be notes that your vendors are going to need to see. So this could be something like, you need this by a certain date, or you're looking for a certain price range or something like that. So something simple like that, we're going to go ahead and start off with. and it's going to send the first RFQ off. Then we're going to do the next one to tech data, and it's going to default to the previous notes that you had because they're probably going to be pretty similar as you have communications between your different vendors here. It'll send that off there. All right, so it went ahead and sent those 4 bid requests, and what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and see this on VendorRFQ, and you can click on the VendorRFQ toolbar button, or you can also select an item here and it'll take you to that specific RFQ. So let's go ahead and do that. And there we go. So here's our request for quote for that keyboard and mouse that we just sent. And you can see that we've got Synnex and tech data, line 1, and then line 2 is down below there. So let's go ahead and go back to QuoteWorks. And let's say that we want to go ahead and send an RFQ to another vendor. And let me just see real quick what vendors we had there. We'll go ahead and do invite more. So right now we don't have Ingram as an option there. So let's go ahead and add Ingram. And to do that, all we're going to do is go to utilities and then vendor maintenance. And from here, all we're going to do is add an email address for our vendor. And we'll click on edit. So it just depends on what your sales reps' names are. So got our sales rep there. And then we're just going to add an email address. For right now, I'm not going to actually have Ingram's email address in here just so that my rep isn't going to be getting emails from us. But you would put in your rep's email address or a generic email address for the sales at Ingram Micro or whoever your rep would be. And we'll go ahead and click on OK. And now we should be able to select this, click on plus, invite another vendor here by clicking on OK. And now we've got Ingram Micro. So let's go ahead and add Ingram Micro. Click on OK. And it went ahead and added that. And now we can go back to VendorRFQ here. And now we have Ingram added as a vendor. And as I'm going through this, like I said, please feel free to ask questions. The more questions you ask, the more information you're going to get from us here. So I definitely invite you to do that. All right, so at this point, we've sent 3 different RFQs out for 2 different items. Obviously, you don't have to necessarily send an RFQ for all the items on the document like I did in this case. You can select them one by one, or maybe you only have certain items that you actually need to get those RFQs for. And what's important to think about here is, why are you sending these RFQs out? Well, it could be because just to get availability. It could be for pricing. It could be just because you're not sure what the supply chain is like beyond just normal availability. So those are things to think about as to why you'd want to use this. So at this point, we've sent that out, like I said. But at this point, we need to go ahead and get responses from our vendors. And to do that, basically, we've already sent we actually ended up sending emails to those vendors, but we're going to skip a step, and I'm going to go ahead and impersonate Synnex here real quick. And this is what your vendors would see. This is what, if the vendor had clicked on a link that they were sent in an email, they'd have the ability to maybe update their part numbers or enter in the price, or they can ask questions as well. Let's go ahead and maybe put in a price here for this item. We can say like $20, but maybe conditions saying valid until Friday of this week. And then we can go ahead and put in a price here for the mouse. And just like that, we can go ahead and submit the bid. And this is just, again, this is what your vendor would see. And that's been done. So now if we go back to us as a sales rep, we know that they've actually viewed this RFQ. And if we refresh it, we'll now see that they've submitted a bid, and at this point, we haven't received anything from Tech Data or Ingram. Okay. So I'm going to pause here and see if there's any questions thus far. All right. Just reading a lengthy question here. Hold on. All right. Might need to come back to the question here from Mark here. But definitely, if you have more questions, feel free to ask more. I'll definitely come back to that question there, Mark, as we get through here. So as you can see, Synnex did have those conditions, and you'll see that those conditions did show up here in red. And then we didn't have conditions from Synnex for this part number. So we'll go ahead now and impersonate another one of our vendors here. Again, this is what the vendor would see, and they'd be receiving an email from us on that. All right, so we'll go ahead and put in a price, no conditions on that one. Maybe we can add a comment here. And we'll go ahead and submit that on behalf of the vendor there. And again, we can see that there's a comment. We'll go ahead and refresh. All right, so at this point now, we've received two different bids from our vendors. If we go back over to QuoteWorks, let's see how that actually comes into play. And we'll go ahead and click on the vendor sourcing panel. If you're familiar with Eatalize, it's exactly the same panel. We're just using it now for VendorRFQ as well. And as you can see, we've got our RFQs at the top, and then we've got our normal Eatalize data towards the bottom there. And you'll notice that there's a star on this bid received from Synnex, and that's because that's where our price conditions were. Okay. All right, so let's go back to VendorRFQ. We'll go to the Ingram Micro one. And as you can see, when you click on an item, it'll bring you right to that line, and it'll actually highlight it as well. And that's going to be very important, especially if you've got a lot of items here on that RFQ. Okay. All right. Still waiting for some more questions here. Let's go ahead and continue on. At this point now, we can either send a message to Tech Data asking for more, asking for pricing. So let's go ahead and do that. And we can go ahead and post a comment. And what that'll do is it'll send an email to my rep over at Tech Data. And you'll notice that we do have the previous comment. Okay. And then from here, what we can do is maybe negotiate a little bit with, say, Synnex, and basically ask, so what's nice here is we're able to keep all of this communication together. You're not having to go back and forth through emails. And obviously we're doing this pretty quickly, but this could be over the course of a couple of hours or even a couple of days as well. All right, So if we go back now, we can go ahead and impersonate tech data. And as you can see, tech data would see those notes or those questions that we had along with each of these items here. So now if we impersonate that and we go back, I would have received an email from John Smith at Tech Data. But if I go back here, I can see this as well. Question here from Joe. Will there be a recording of today's webinar? Yes, we do plan on recording this webinar, but with any recordings of these webinars, there's no guarantee, but we will do our best to make sure that this is available for you. Let's see, question from Chris. How long does the discussion thread stay searchable? Say 6 months later, could you pull up the thread again? Yes, you definitely can. And we'll definitely talk about how to search for different, RFQs or see the different communications as well. It's a good question there, Chris. Basically, you do have the ability to search for any of the RFQs that you've had in the past. So like we can go back, here's some very early ones here. And I have the ability to see all of the threads that I've had in the past as well. Very easy to find. So you need to know either the vendor or some keywords or something like that to know which ones to search for. And it can even include the closed RFQs as well. Good question, Chris. Okay. All right. So at this point, we're still waiting on some information from Synnex, but we can go ahead and award this if we want to. And the way that we would award that, it's not going to be through this interface. It's going to be through QuoteWorks itself. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's just make sure that we've got all the updated information here just by refreshing that panel. And we'll go ahead and select the RFQ. And all we're going to do is just double click on this. And we're going to go ahead and award. And we'll go ahead and click on OK. And we'll go to the other item. We'll go ahead and maybe award this one to Synnex. You'll notice that the vendor up here currently is D&H. If I double click on this and click on yes, click on OK, you'll notice that the vendor has changed as well. So now if we go back to VendorRFQ, oops, must have closed that, there we go. If we go ahead and refresh this now, oh, that's the other one, sorry about that. Let's go ahead and actually go to the one that we were working on here. So you'll see that the status of each one of these items is awarded, and it shows who it was awarded to. Okay. So again, we're keeping everything together in one spot. We're not having to go back and forth through email. We're able to see it all organized in one location here. Okay. Let's see. Any other questions here before we continue on? What we'll do is maybe take a closer look at this on QuoteWorks Web to see what that would look like. Okay. So as you can see, it's very easy to use. There isn't that much to set up. Basically, if you're using QuoteWorks Web currently, the only thing that you'll have to set up for this is basically just making sure all of your vendors have email addresses that you want to be sending these RFQs out to. And then obviously getting a trial of VendorRFQ or setting up as a live subscription as well. All right, so we got some questions coming in now. Awesome. Question from Barbara here. Can all the vendors see all comments and questions, or is it only that specific vendor? Great question. So basically, the vendors would only see what's in their view. So for instance, if I were to go back to see what Tech Data would have seen, basically Tech Data sees the comments here from them and any of those communications, but the vendors will not see any communications from other vendors. They'll only see their communications. And obviously anything that you've sent to them as well. So anything in those threads they'll see, but not outside of those threads. All right, question from Chris. Does the naming scheme follow the quotes in QuoteWorks? Ours starts with CAW. Will they be the same? Actually, they will. So you'll notice that we've got our quote number here at the top here, and then it's got the RFQ, and then it's got 1 and then B afterwards, and that's just letting us know that it's the first RFQ and it's B being the that specific vendor. And that's currently the naming scheme that we have. If you have questions on that, we can definitely answer that further. Question from Janet. Does it show who will deliver it faster? Only if you've asked that sales rep at the vendor that specific question. We don't necessarily have a field currently for what date they will deliver it by. That would primarily be in comments, or what you would do is in your notes that you send them, basically let them know that it has to be delivered by an X date and whether or not they're going to be able to fulfill it by that date as well. Okay. All right, and we'll go ahead and read the lengthy question here while we're waiting for some more questions there. Situation: a manufacturer has a large number of distributors and or resellers. All the distributors or resellers buy from that manufacturer. Do they not go out to competitive tender, so there is only one supplier? But the prices change a lot, as does the availability, and they have to ask every time, often by picking up the phone. Is this an appropriate solution for the distributors/resellers in this scenario, standing in the place of real-time price and availability with manufacturers who are not hooked into that and do not wish to become so? Yeah, I mean, this is definitely a way to do that. As you saw, when you went ahead and sent that request off and the vendor went ahead and gave a dollar value, it was then updated in the quote in QuoteWorks. So this is definitely a prime example of when they need to ask every single time, as long as they know a specific part, that they can then go out and get that pricing on a one-by-one basis, especially for those that do not have pricing availability. All right, let's go ahead and log into QuoteWorks Web now. Just give me 1 second here. And we're just going to go ahead and get logged in here. So if you are using QuoteWorks Web primarily, you will be able to send off those RFQs. Just the setup for those vendors currently are not in QuoteWorks Web. All right, so let's go ahead and create a new document here. And what we'll do is, again, just do a very simple search here. And we'll go ahead and add this guy. And this guy. All right, and we'll go back to our workbook here. And now we've got our 2 items here. I didn't have pricing on here yet, but we'll just go ahead and manually type in some prices here, just so we have something to work from. Okay, so now we've got that. Let's go ahead and save it. And let's go ahead, just like we did on desktop, we'll go ahead and multiple select the lines, and then we're gonna go ahead and click on the plus. And you can see this is gonna look very similar to what we had on desktop. And what we can do now is we'll go ahead and send it to all of the vendors here and click on OK. And again, defaulting that, our internal notes, click on OK. Good, OK. And again, this is going to look very similar to what we've seen already. We have the ability to update, again, those notes for the vendors as we need to. All right, so we sent all of those out. So now let's go ahead and take a closer look at that on VendorRFQ. So we'll go ahead and click on that. And as you see here, we were able to send off those basically 10 different bid requests between these 2 items here. Okay. And you'll notice that some of them had part numbers and the other ones didn't. The ones with part numbers are the ones that were available through Eatalize, and that's why those have prices. Those have those part numbers. Question here from Barbara: are there any future plans for the ability to make the RFQ more about delivery time? That's a good question. We do have one of the developers here on the call here, so hopefully they'll see that and they'll be able to provide more detail either on or off the webinar here. All right, so let's now, if we wanted to, we have the ability to go ahead and act on behalf of that vendor. So I'll go ahead and do that real quick. We'll go ahead and put in a part number here for Ingram. And we'll go ahead and put in a cost and a price. And now, if we go back over here, we'll see that we now have the bid that's been submitted on behalf. So if we go back to QuoteWorks Web now and click on the sourcing panel, we now have the cost here from Ingram Micro. Okay. All right. Any other questions here? So Barbara, I am getting a message here. For delivery time, it would be possible in the future to display an additional field like delivery time for the vendor to supply. In the meantime, to get started, I would recommend that you simply include in the note to each vendor to supply. In the meantime, Note to each vendor, please provide delivery date in the price conditions field. That's actually a great message there. Thank you for that. So for instance, if we were to update this, maybe ProVantage here, in the note when you were sending that out to them, they could put that in the conditions, basically saying, available by, Thursday, for instance. And if they were to give us, a cost, we could put it in date as well. It doesn't necessarily need to be a day. So for instance, it could be 4/28/22, and then we could put in a price. So now when we go back here, you'll see that ProVantage here, it says available by Thursday, and we've also got a date here in this case. So it just depends on how you want to handle that. All right. And Patricia has a question. Is there a suggestion that vendors respond more quickly this way than traditional way? Well, traditional way, you're probably sending them emails already. And basically, this is doing the exact same thing, but it's making it more centralized for yourself. And you're able to very easily keep track of which vendors have responded, which vendors have even viewed it. I kind of equate this in a way of VendorRFQ is to what QuoteValet is for your customers, but VendorRFQ is that for your vendors. So that way, with QuoteValet, you're able to see when your customers are able to, when the customers have viewed a quote, made changes, and accepted. Same thing for your vendors now with VendorRFQ. You can see when the vendors have asked questions, when they've viewed the RFQ, as well as when they've given you a cost as well. So it's kind of in that same vein as far as what this is going to do for you. But the main thing is being able to keep everything centralized, so you're not like going back and forth in Outlook. Okay, which vendor responded, which one didn't? As you can see, right here, I know that 2 of my vendors have responded, whereas 3 have not. And if it's time sensitive, if only 2 of them have responded, then those are the 2 that I'm going to go with, as opposed to one of the other ones where I don't even know if they have stock available for us. Especially like XYZ Parts Unlimited, I don't have real time with them, so I'm not able to get real time availability. So that's why this is super important, is you're able to get that direct communication with your vendors in that one platform here. And just like I was saying before, if a customer, or I should say if a vendor, forgets to include, the conditions, for instance, like maybe Ingram didn't include those conditions, and that's something that I told them that I wanted them to, you do have the ability to ping them as well, when will you have availability? And that immediately sent an email to my rep over at Ingram. So when they open up their document, let me go ahead and close some of these tabs out here. When they open up their document, they're going to see that, and we could have told them in that same question there to put it in the conditions. So, I could say, 4/25/22. So now when we go back, that's now updated in there as well. And we've already talked a little bit about reminding or pinging your vendors, if they didn't respond. We showed that in the initial one. So for instance, Cinex, so you have the ability to very easily ping your vendors without having to go, into your email, finding them, and figuring out, oh yeah, what's my rep's email address? You've got it all set up through QuoteWorks, so you can very easily do that. So just like that, I sent off 3 emails to those vendors, and they'll have the ability to click on a link, and it'll bring them right to the interface there. All right. Okay. So now, so we've done that. Let's go ahead and refresh this here. We've got our different costs and availability here from each of our vendors. You know, in this case, Synnex has the lowest cost via real time, but at this point, they don't have availability, as you can see. So let's go ahead and select Ingram here, and we're just going to double click. And there we go. And so as you can see, the interface is very similar between QuoteWorks Desktop and in QuoteWorks Web. But let's go back here to QuoteWorks Desktop. All right, and we'll go ahead and save that. And before I forget, let's go ahead, I'm going to go ahead and close out of this document. Make sure that's saved. Yep. And let's go ahead and go to open. We'll open that same document that we were just modifying in web there, which was that printer and server. Guess I didn't close it, but anyways, so as you can see, it's very easy to work with these documents. Let's try one more time here. All right, so it's still in use. But going back to this, as you saw, it was very easy to award those RFQs. And if we go back to VendorRFQ, you can go there by clicking on the toolbar. And this will take you to the searches here. And you're able to filter by vendors, by the RFQ number if you know it, RFQ name, by the sales rep. You're able to see everything that has happened very easily with each of those RFQs. So whenever we've got something here where a vendor was waiting for stock updates, or maybe they entered in pricing, you've got all of that information in one spot. And so we can go ahead and go back if we wanted to, and we can look at some of these older RFQs. We can see how many of these bids were done. We can see that these were awarded as well. So just wanted to give you a quick overview here. Basically the way that the subscription works is that it is based on the number of users that would need to be in VendorRFQ at any given time. So even if you have like 5 or 6 QuoteWorks licenses, you may only need a subscription for 1 or 2 VendorRFQ subscriptions. So let's see. Yeah, good question from Bob. Do you find that vendors need any training or heads up about how to handle RFQs this way? That's actually one of the reasons why we're actually going to be creating videos specifically for the vendors. For the most part, it's pretty intuitive as far as on their side, what they'll need to do. You saw what they would see, but we are going to be creating videos specifically for the vendors that will be hyperlinked in the email that they receive. So any of your vendors that need a little bit of training on their side will have that for them as well. But if you have any questions or you're interested in learning more about VendorRFQ, you can definitely give us a call, 407-248-1481. Send us an email, sales@quoteworks.com. We can get you set up with a trial as well. All right, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and leave this open for just a few minutes as people have questions. So if you have questions, feel free to ask, but otherwise, thank you for joining us today on this webinar. We will, like I said, record this, and this will be available for you as well. See if there's any more questions. Okay. So a question from Joe. So again, you just mentioned the demo. Yes, you can definitely get a trial of a VendorRFQ. It is very, like I said, it's very easy to set up, especially if you've got QuoteWorks Web, but it's got the same limitations that QuoteWorks Web has, meaning that you will need to be on the corporate edition and it rehosted to SQL. and allowing in your firewall would need to allow us to communicate with it as well. And let's see, question from Bob. Are there any bundle or suite pricing discounts? There are not, but like I said, it is based on concurrent users for VendorRFQ. So basically you only need as many licenses as you need people in at any given time. And in most places, in most circumstances, you're not going to need to have, you know, everybody doing this, but if you did, you do have that capability. A question from Joe, how long is the trial version? Typically we do about 30 days for a trial, but if you need a little bit longer, you can definitely let us know and we can get that set up for you as well. All right. And you know, the thing to point out too, so I didn't actually talk about the price. The subscription for VendorRFQ is $20 a month, and basically the amount of time that that's going to save you by using VendorRFQ is you're definitely going to be saving at least an hour's worth of work each month, probably definitely more than that. So the $20 a month is going to be very easy to recoup, and you're definitely going to see a return on that investment there. Okay. All right, it looks like we don't have any other questions here today. So like I said, we will be recording this. A question from Joe, yes, that is $20 per concurrent user. So basically, if you've got 2 licenses, that would allow for 2 people to be in at any given time with 1 license. You could have 5 people have access to VendorRFQ, but only 1 at a time. And it's very similar to what we do with our real-time licensing with the reserve concurrency on that. It is not a day concurrent, it's a reserve concurrent. So it's basically if they've logged into QuoteWorks, they've used VendorRFQ, then they'll be using it. As soon as they log out, they're no longer using it. So it's not like Quote Valet, Paul. Good question. All right, so with that, if you do have any other questions, feel free to send us an email, sales@quoteworks.com. Give us a call, 407-248-1481, and we will have this webinar recorded for you to review as well. And then we've got lots of videos that we'll be adding to the website as well about VendorRFQ. And if you're interested in a trial, give us a call and have a great day.